A dark romance series. The Monster Who Owned Me. Part 8. 4 years. The most dangerous thing about being truly known is not what the other person discovers. It is what you discover about yourself. In the act of being seen. Everything you thought you were. Everything you'd been too afraid to become. Chapter 1. The letter in the sketchbook. Violet May, the penthouse. There is a particular quality to Saturday mornings in the penthouse that I had not anticipated when I agreed to move in. It is different from every other hour of the week in that building. The weekdays have their rhythm, the arrivals, the meetings, the controlled velocity of a man who treats time the way he treats everything, as a resource to be allocated with precision. The weeknights have their own texture, the gradual unwinding, the library and the fire and the conversations that go past midnight. But Saturday mornings are something else entirely. Saturday mornings are when I understand what it means to live somewhere rather than stay somewhere. I had been in the penthouse for 3 weeks. Not officially, the Brooklyn apartment was still mine, the 6-month conditions still in effect, the address on my mail still the brownstone in Park Slope. But in practice, in the way that matters, I had been here. My sketchbooks were on the coffee table in the library. My coffee preference had reorganized his kitchen's morning routine. My coat was in the front closet next to his, which occupied, I had noticed, the leftmost position, which was the position a person takes when they have lived alone and have never had to shift to make room. He had shifted without being asked. I thought about this sometimes, the small adjustments, the leftmost coat position, the second shelf of the bathroom cabinet cleared, the particular coffee he'd sourced from somewhere that was not the building's cafe because he had noticed, with the comprehensive attention he gave everything, that the building cafe's version made me grimace on the first sip, and he had rectified this without comment. The adjustments of someone who had decided that another person's presence mattered, and was enacting that decision in small, daily, unremarkable ways. This Saturday morning in May, I was alone in the library because he had a call. The Cresswell settlement details, his lawyer, the precision work of converting a concession into a binding legal document. I had my sketchbook open on my lap, and the coffee he'd made before the call, and the library doing its Saturday morning thing, which was being a room that felt inhabited in the best sense, the warmth of books and use, and the particular quality of a space where important things had been said. I was leafing through the sketchbook looking for a specific drawing, a preliminary concept I'd sketched 3 months ago that I now thought might be the seed of a new commission, when I found the letter. It was folded into the back cover pocket. The sketchbook was one I'd brought from Brooklyn, one of the accumulation of sketchbooks I'd carried through 4 years of New York, and this pocket had been functioning as a repository for things I'd tucked away and half forgotten. A receipt from a gallery opening, a paint chip from a fabricator, a note I'd made at the crest about the ceiling beam measurements. And beneath all of those, a letter on cream paper, folded into thirds, slightly creased along the fold lines of something that had been handled more than once. I pulled it out without thinking. It was in my sketchbook, after all it was mine. I unfolded it. The handwriting stopped me before the content. I knew his handwriting. I had been looking at it for 7 months, on notes he left, on the margins of architectural drawings, on the small, careful inscriptions he made in books he gave me, which he'd started doing in February, leaving books on the library table with a line written inside the front cover that was never a dedication and never just a note, but something precisely between the two. I knew the particular upright precision of his letters, the way his capital A sat slightly differently from everyone else's A, the way his punctuation was more deliberate than most people's, the comma and the period placed with the same considered attention he brought to everything. I looked at the letter in my hands, and I knew his handwriting. I looked at the date. 4 years ago. May, a specific date in May, 4 years before this May, which meant 4 years before the wrong elevator and the champagne glasses and the deal made in a back room with a woman in a stained dress. 4 years before any of it. 4 years, which was how long I had been in New York. I read it. It was formal. The language of a collector or an institutional representative, the the kind of letter that exists in the professional world of art acquisition and gallery relations. Addressed to the director of a gallery I recognized, a small but respected Lower East Side space that had included my work in a group exhibition 4 years ago, one of my first showings in New York, the show that had marked the beginning of my existence in the city's art world. The letter inquired about an artist whose work had appeared in that exhibition. A piece, it said, that had demonstrated an approach to material and light that the writer found, the word he used was necessary. Not extraordinary, not impressive. Necessary. The word of someone who has encountered something that fills a space they didn't know was empty. He asked for the artist's contact information, or, if that was not possible, asked to be notified if the artist had further work showing. The artist was not named in the letter, but the piece was described. Salvaged glass, suspended, afternoon light through a west-facing window in a building scheduled for demolition in Red Hook. I had made that piece. It had been in that show 4 years ago, a month after I'd moved to New York, when I was still so new to the city that I'd taken the subway to the gallery opening with my good coat and my practiced confidence and my absolute refusal to show how frightened I was. I had been 25. I had been so new. The letter was dated the week after that opening. He had written this letter the week after he'd seen my first New York showing, not the group show in March where he claimed to have first encountered my work, not the 11 minutes in front of what we left in the rooms. 4 years ago, in a smaller gallery, in a piece I'd made when I was new and frightened and figuring out the city. He had been looking for me for 4 years. I sat in the library with the letter in my hands and the Saturday morning quiet around me and the coffee going cold on the table, and I thought, what is this? Not angrily, not with the specific cold clarity of the photographs in the cream folder, the surveillance, the engineered collision. This was different. The photographs had been a mechanism, a thing done to arrange an outcome. This letter had been written before any of that, before the plan, before the project, before the installation commission, before he knew my name. He had seen my work, and he had gone to find me and not found me. And then 4 years later he had seen my work again and built an entire infrastructure to make sure we met. I thought about the Forbes profile. He only plays games he's already won. I had thought, at the time, that this described a kind of ruthlessness, the refusal to engage with uncertainty. But sitting in the library with the letter, I was thinking about it differently. I was thinking about a man who had looked at a piece of glass and salvaged windows in a gallery in Red Hook 4 years ago, and had understood something, had felt the specific, total recognition of something necessary, and had then spent 4 years and a surveillance operation and an elevator malfunction and a 6-figure commission trying to reach it. Not ruthlessness. The opposite of ruthlessness. The specific, patient, possibly insane dedication of someone who has identified what they need and refuses to let the world make it inaccessible. I was still sitting there when I heard his call end. The murmur of his voice through the library door went quiet, footsteps in the corridor. The door opened. He came in with the slightly distracted quality of someone transitioning from professional to personal, the calibration settling, the controlled surface softening fractionally in the way it did when he returned to spaces where I was. He stopped when he saw my face. The letter was visible in my hands. He saw it. Something moved across his face, not quite alarm, not quite relief. The expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific reckoning and has just understood it has arrived. "Violet," he said. "Sit down," I said. "I have questions." Chapter 2. 4 years. Violet, the same morning. He sat. He looked at the letter, and then at me with the expression that I had learned to read as the pre-admission expression. The face of someone who has decided, before the question is fully asked, that the answer is going to be the complete truth. "Where did you find that?" he asked. "The back pocket of my sketchbook," I said. "How did it get there?" A pause. "I put it there," he said. 3 weeks ago, the night before you moved in." I looked at him. "You put it there?" "Yes." "You put a letter in my sketchbook. A letter that reveals that you saw my work 4 years ago and tried to find me, and you put it there and didn't tell me it was there. I put it there, he said, because I wanted you to find it, when you found it, not when I told you to find it. I stared at him. That is the most Adrian Kane thing you have ever said to me. Something that might have been sheepishness, if Adrian Kane was capable of sheepishness, moved briefly across his face. I know, he said. I'm aware that it exhibits certain tendencies I've been working on. The thing where I arrange the conditions for something rather than simply creating the situation directly. Yes, I said, that thing. I'm sorry, he said, straightforwardly, the way he said the things he meant. I should have shown it to you, told you about it. I put it in the sketchbook because I wanted you to find it in your own time, in your own space, and I convinced myself that was more considerate when actually it was. Still a form of arranging, I said. Still a form of arranging, he agreed. Yes. The library was quiet. The May morning light was coming through the window with the specific warmth of a season that has finally arrived. I held the letter and looked at the man across from me and tried to sort through the layers of what I was feeling, which were several and simultaneous and not entirely consistent with each other. Tell me, I said, all of it from the beginning 4 years ago. He looked at the letter. Then he looked at me with the full attention gaze that was his version of gathering himself for something that required everything. I was at the opening by accident, he said. The Lower East Side Gallery. I had a meeting in the neighborhood that ran short and I walked past the sign and went in because I was early and I had 20 minutes to fill. An accident, I said. A genuine one, he said. One of the very few in this story. A slight pause that acknowledged the irony. I walked through the show the way I walk through galleries, quickly, efficiently, looking for the thing that stops me. Most shows don't have a thing that stops me. This one did. I knew which piece he meant. I remembered making it, the salvaged glass from a building in Red Hook that had been a storage facility and was being converted to luxury apartments. The particular quality of the afternoon light that came through a west-facing window and hit the glass at an angle that made it do something I'd been trying to understand since I first started working with salvaged materials. I had spent 2 weeks in that building before the conversion began, photographing and measuring and thinking, and then I'd made the piece in my first New York studio, which was a basement space in Bushwick that I'd rented for $300 a month, and that had a ceiling so low I'd had to design the installation to hang rather than stand. It had been in the group show for 3 weeks. 4 people had asked about acquiring it. None of them had been Adrian Kane. You wrote the letter and never got a response, I said. The gallery director said the artist was not currently accepting acquisition inquiries, he said, which I later understood to mean. The artist had sold the piece to the one collector who asked first, and the director didn't want to explain that a follow-up inquiry from someone whose name should have produced a different response had arrived after the fact. Someone else bought it, I said, understanding. A collector in Berlin, he said. I identified them eventually. I considered making an offer. But you didn't. No, he paused. I decided that the piece being unavailable was information, that I should look for what came next. I thought about this, about the specific quality of a man who had identified something necessary and, finding it unavailable, had decided to wait for what came next. Not forced entry, not the transaction of acquisition. Patience. The willingness to let the story develop on its terms. You followed my career, I said. I tracked your exhibitions, he said. Shows you were included in, galleries you were in conversations with. For 3 years I watched your work develop through what was publicly visible and waited for the right moment, for a piece that was available, or for a situation where a direct approach seemed possible. What stopped the direct approach? He was quiet for a moment. This was the question with the real answer. I could tell. The pause was the specific pause of someone arriving at the truth that is harder than the facts. What I felt when I saw your first piece, he said slowly, was not the feeling I have when I encounter work I want to acquire. It was something larger than that. Something that, he stopped. I didn't have language for it. I still don't fully. but I understood that whatever it was, I didn't want to reduce it to a transaction. I didn't want to be the collector who bought your work and then introduced himself and had that introduction contaminated by the fact of the purchase. You wanted to meet me as a person, not as a patron, I said. Yes. A pause, which led to an elevator malfunction, which I acknowledge is a significantly worse solution. The almost smile. Despite myself, despite the layered complexity of what he was telling me, I felt the almost smile happening on my own face. It is a significantly worse solution, I agreed. I know. Adrian. Yes. You have been, from the very beginning, before I existed in your world at all. You have been doing this thing where you identify what you need, and then build an entire architecture to reach it without the simple step of just walking up to the thing and saying, I see you. I need to know you. He looked at me. He did not disagree. Why? I asked, not accusingly, genuinely. You understand the pattern. You've been working on the pattern. Why is the direct thing so? Why does it require the infrastructure? He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is its own process, visible in the stillness of someone who is looking at something inside themselves they don't usually look at directly. Because the direct thing fails, he said finally. In my experience, the direct approach, walking up to something that matters and saying I need this, it fails, or it reduces the thing to something lesser than it is. The people who have mattered most to me have either gone or been taken. My mother, Alina's illness, the crest. Every time I have tried to simply hold something that mattered, something has. He stopped. So you stopped holding directly, I said. You built structures instead. I built structures instead, he said. Yes. The library was very quiet. I looked at the letter in my hands. At the formal, precise handwriting of a 30-year-old man who had walked into a gallery by accident and found something necessary, and then spent 4 years building a structure to reach it safely, because the direct approach had failed him every time it mattered. I thought about the architecture of it, about what it meant to love carefully, to be so careful that the carefulness itself becomes a kind of distance, the very protection you build becoming the thing that keeps you from the thing you're protecting. I thought about what Alina had told me. You see clearly and stay anyway. I thought, yes, that is what I do. I set the letter on the table between us. I need you to understand something, I said. He was watching me with the full attention. The structures you build, the research and the access cards and the letters in sketchbooks, I understand why you build them. I understand the fear underneath them. I am not asking you to stop being afraid. I held his gaze. But I need you to understand that what you've been trying to protect by building them is not something that can be protected that way. The only way to keep something real is to let it be real, to be in it directly, without the infrastructure between you and the thing itself. He was very still. I have been here, I said, directly for 7 months without the infrastructure, and I'm still here. A long pause. Something worked through his expression, the difficult, layered thing that happened when he was confronting something fundamental. I know, he said. I know you know, I said. I need you to believe it. The distance between knowing and believing. The distance between understanding a truth intellectually and trusting it in the body, in the reflexes, in the place where fear lives. He looked at me for a long time. The May morning light moved through the window. The city outside was doing its Saturday things. I'm working on it, he said. I know, I said. I see you working on it every day. And you're still here. And I'm still here, I said. That's the evidence. You don't need to keep building structures to hold me. I'm choosing to be here. You can put your hands down. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically. Nothing about him was dramatic in the conventional sense. But something shifted, a weight redistributed, the specific physical evidence of something releasing that had been held for a very long time. He crossed the room. He sat beside me on the sofa, closer than the chairs allowed. He picked up the letter from the table and looked at it for a moment, the handwriting of his younger self, the formal language, the word necessary, and then he set it down. 4 years, he said. 4 years, I said. I would have waited longer. I know, I said. I know you would have. Is that, he paused, is that frightening, the degree of it? I thought about it honestly. 4 years, the patience of it. The specific, sustained, architecture-building patience of a man who had identified something necessary and refused to let it be lost. It's frightening in the way that very real things are frightening, I said. Not in the way that dangerous things are frightening. There's a difference. What's the difference? Dangerous things make you want to run, I said. Real things make you want to be careful, to be worthy of them. He looked at me with the enormous thing, the full measure, everything. I have been trying to be worthy of this, he said, for 4 years. I know, I said. I see it. I took his hand. Now stop trying and just be it. The look on his face, I will keep that look with the other ones. The real smile, the full one, and something beneath it that was older than the smile, something that had been waiting for this specific permission for a very long time. He kissed me in the Saturday morning library with the letter on the table, and the May light coming through the window and the city going about its business below. And it was ordinary and it was total, the way the best things are. Chapter 3. What Alina paints. Violet the following week. I told Alina about the letter on a Tuesday. We were in her studio, the 17th floor, which had evolved over the months of her recovery from a contained refuge into something more like an actual studio space. The way spaces evolve when the person in them has stopped surviving and started living. She had requested more canvases, a larger easel, better light panels. The room had reorganized itself around the demands of serious work, which was the most reliable sign I knew of a person who had returned to themselves. She was working on the crest painting, the large one, the full-scale rendering of the room with the floor-to-ceiling windows, the winter light through old glass. She had been working on it for 2 months, and it was extraordinary in the specific way of paintings that are made from deep understanding rather than observation. You could tell that she had been inside the room, that she had stood in its light, that the painting was not a representation of a space, but a record of an experience of a space. She listened to my account of finding the letter without putting down her brush, which was how she listened to things she was thinking about seriously. With the painting as the ground of her attention, the words arriving alongside rather than instead of the work. When I finished, she added a line to the canvas, examined it, added another. How do you feel? She asked. I'm not entirely sure, I said honestly. Something between moved and not alarmed, exactly. Something that requires examination. Tell me the examination. I had been doing the examination, I realized, since Saturday morning. In the background of everything, the days in the studio, the evenings in the library, the Tuesday call I'd had about the London Commission, I had been running the examination on a background thread, the way you process difficult things when you're also doing other things. 4 years, I said. He saw my first New York piece and spent 4 years not actively pursuing, not obsessively in the way I might have thought before I knew him, but watching, maintaining awareness, waiting for the moment. That is very him, Alina said. It is very him, I agreed. And I understand it better now than I would have in October. In October, I would have found it alarming in a different way. The way the photographs were alarming, the surveillance quality of it. Now I understand the difference between surveillance and watching, between watching for an opportunity to control and watching for the right moment to approach. The difference being the intention, Alina said. The difference being the intention, I confirmed. He wasn't watching me to find leverage. He was watching because he had found something necessary and didn't know how to reach it without building something first. Alina set down her brush and turned to look at me. The full attention, her version of it, the painter's attention, the quality of seeing rather than looking. You are not alarmed, she said, not a question. I am not alarmed, I said. I am moved. I am moved by the length of it, by the patience, by the fact that he spent 4 years looking at my work from a distance and building himself into the person who could reach it properly. I paused. That's not nothing, Alina. That's not possession or obsession. That is someone who understood from the beginning what was required of them and worked toward it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I need to tell you something. The quality of the sentence made me look at her more carefully. What? I knew about the letter, she said. Not the specific letter, but the first piece, the Red Hook show. He told me about it years ago before I was ill when we were still. She stopped, started again. He told me about it in the context of talking about his work, about why he acquired art. He said there was a piece once that I didn't get to in time, glass and salvaged windows and afternoon light. He said it stopped him. I looked at her. He did not tell me the artist's name, she said. Not then. I only understood later when he told me about the installation commission, when he described you that it had been you, the same person. You knew, I said. When I found the photograph of you in the studio, when I first came to floor 17, you already knew that the installation artist was the same person whose work he'd seen 4 years before. Yes, she said. And you didn't tell me. It was not mine to tell, she said. As it was not mine to tell you about the crest, or about Sophia, some things must come from the person who owns them. I can only make conditions favorable. A slight pause, as Nora does. I looked at her. At the painter who had been in this building for 8 months and had been watching from her window and her camera feed and her conversations with both of us, with the specific, comprehensive attention of someone who understands that witness is itself a form of care. You and Nora, I said. The two of you have been managing the conditions this whole time. Elena picked up her brush, turned back to the canvas. The faintest suggestion of something that was not quite a smile moved at the corner of her mouth. We have been ensuring, she said, that the things that needed to happen had the best possible circumstances for happening. That is all. That is not all, I said. No, she agreed, but it is what we are prepared to admit to. I sat back in the chair by the window. Outside, the May morning was doing what May mornings do in New York. The light carrying a quality that didn't exist in any other month, the particular warmth that comes after the long deprivation of winter, the city responding to it with the specific energy of people who have been cold for too long and are not taking the warmth for granted. What did you think, I said to Elena, when you understood that I was the person from the Red Hook show, when you understood the full length of it? She was quiet for a moment, painting. I thought, she said slowly, that the universe occasionally gets things right, that sometimes the long version is the right version, that 4 years of watching from a distance and building yourself into someone worthy is, in its strange way, a form of love. The form love takes when the person doing it doesn't yet know how to give it directly. I thought about this. He knows how to give it directly now, I said. Yes, Elena said, you taught him. I don't think I taught him. You were the occasion for his learning it, she said, which is different from teaching and also the same thing. She added a stroke of pale gold to the painting, the light in the crest's room, the particular quality of afternoon through old glass. I watched it appear on the canvas and thought about all the things the light had witnessed. The original room, the crest in its decades of seasons, the studio in Kane Tower, which had held 6 months of the most important work of my life. And here, in Elena's rendering, the light traveling from its source to the painting's surface and being held there, permanent. The memory that lives in old glass. Elena, I said. Yes. Thank you for watching, for the conditions. She looked at me briefly, the direct look. Thank you, she said, for being the answer to a question this building has been holding for a very long time. We were quiet after that. She painted. I sat in the chair. The city was warm and bright outside the 17th floor window, and I was in the right room with the right person, thinking about 4 years and the architecture of patience and the specific, strange, beautiful way that necessary things eventually find each other. Chapter 4. The London Commission. Violet May, 3 weeks later. The London Commission had been sitting in my professional correspondence since February, a museum in South Kensington, a new wing under construction, a permanent installation for the central atrium that was, in scope and ambition, a step beyond even Kane Tower. The kind of commission that happened once or twice in a career, if a career was going well. The kind that established you not just as a New York artist, but as an international one. I had been considering it with the careful, unhurried attention I gave important decisions. Not stalling, genuinely weighing. The London piece would require at minimum 3 months of presence in the city, possibly 4. It would require sourcing materials I hadn't worked with before. The museum's building had specific structural characteristics that would change my approach. It would require being away from New York, from the studio on 18, from Alina on 17, from the library on 53. From Adrian. I raised it at dinner on a Thursday evening. The kitchen, not the library, a distinction that I had come to understand as communicating something about the register of conversation. Kitchen meant practical, present tense, the ordinary business of 2 people sharing a life. Library meant the larger things, the examined things. The London Commission, I said. I'm going to take it. He looked up from whatever he was reading. He read at the kitchen table most evenings while I cooked, a domestic arrangement that had emerged without discussion and that I had privately decided was one of the best things about living with him. When did you decide? This afternoon. The scope is right. The material problem is interesting. The timing works with the crest documentation being complete. I set 2 plates on the table. 3 months minimum, probably 4. I know, he said. You know. I know about the commission. I've known about it since February. I've been waiting for you to decide. He paused, without asking. I looked at him. The deliberate emphasis on without asking, the acknowledgement of the work he'd done to hold back the question, to let me reach the decision without his presence in it. How long did it take you, I asked, to stop yourself from asking? A pause. 3 weeks, he said. I almost asked twice. I wrote a text and deleted it once. I mentioned it to Nora instead, which... You told Nora instead of asking me. She told me it was not her domain, he said, with the expression of someone who has received a professional reminder about appropriate delegation. She was correct. I sat down across from him. I'm going to need a studio in London, I said. The museum has space, but it's shared, which won't work. I need my own. I have a property in Notting Hill, he said immediately. 5th floor, east facing the light is. Adrian. He stopped. He heard himself. That came out as arranging, he said. It came out as arranging, I confirmed without heat. Try again. A pause. I have a property in Notting Hill that you're welcome to use if it suits your requirements. I can send you the details and you can decide whether it works. Better, I said. Thank you. Also, he said, I'd like to come. Not for the duration. I can't be away from the company for 4 months, but visits, if that's... Yes, I said, that's what I want too. Something settled in his face, the small relief of a question that didn't require courage to ask but was asked carefully anyway. The daily practice of it. The way you rebuild a reflex, 1 instance at a time. I'll send you the property details tomorrow, he said. I'll look at them the day after, I said. Tonight I'm celebrating. He looked at me. Celebrating what? The commission, I said, and the fact that I've been here long enough to see you ask instead of arrange. The real smile, the full one. That's worth celebrating, he said. It is, I said. Open something good. He opened something very good. We ate and talked about London, the city itself, which he knew well and I'd been to twice, the particular light of the city in summer, and how it would change my approach to the materials, the neighborhoods, the museum's specific architecture. He told me about Notting Hill in a way that was information rather than management, the distinction clear now and increasingly habitual. At some point in the evening, he put his hand over mine on the table, the way he did when a conversation had moved from the surface into the real thing. You're going to make something extraordinary there, he said. I always make something extraordinary, I said. It's my thing. The look, the almost smile, and the warmth beneath it, and the 4 years beneath that. Yes, he said, it is. 3 days before I left for London, I moved the last of my things from Brooklyn. Not dramatically, there wasn't much to move. 4 years in 3 rooms with the deliberate economy of someone who valued their money, and what I'd accumulated was the work, the sketchbooks, the materials, and a collection of objects that had histories. The Wolfstein apartment went back to the landlord with clean walls and 2 of the better potted plants I'd acquired over 4 years, which I left for the next tenant because I had decided, standing in the empty rooms for the last time, that someone else should have the luck. I brought the rest to the penthouse in 2 trips, the second trip including the photograph on my desk, the Ohio winter light through frozen fields, and a small piece of the original red hook glass from the piece he'd seen 4 years ago. I'd kept it all this time, a fragment from the cutting and the fitting, the kind of material that accumulates in any studio where you work with salvage. I'd carried it from studio to studio for 4 years without fully knowing why. I set it on the library shelf. He saw it that evening. He picked it up the way he always picked up materials, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who understands that objects carry information in their substance. He held it to the window and the evening light came through it, and it did the thing that old glass does, bent the light, fractured it, returned it transformed. He held it for a long moment. "This is from the red hook piece," he said. Not a question. He knew the quality of the glass. "I've been carrying it for 4 years," I said. "I didn't know it was from the piece you saw. I just kept it because it was beautiful." He looked at me. The light from the glass moved across his face. "You've been carrying it for 4 years," he said. "Yes." "The same 4 years." "The same 4 years," I said. The library was quiet. The glass in his hand caught the evening light and scattered it across the room in the slow, specific patterns of old glass, the patterns that were never quite the same twice, that changed with the hour and the season and the angle of the sun. He set the glass back on the shelf, carefully, in the position where the light would reach it. Then he looked at me with the 4 years of it, all of it, the whole impossible architecture, and I looked back, and the room held everything, and we were both, for a long moment, completely without words. Which was, I thought, exactly right. Some things don't need language. Some things are better in the light. Chapter 5. London, first week. Violet June. The Notting Hill property was a 5th-floor flat in a Victorian conversion, east-facing, as he'd said, with windows that were not as old as the Crest's glass, but old enough to do interesting things with morning light. I had looked at the details he'd sent, as I'd said I would. The day after he sent them, they were good, the space was practical, the light was workable, the location was a 15-minute walk from the museum. I had emailed to say, "This will work, thank you." He had replied, "The key will be there when you arrive," and that had been the whole of the arrangement. No instructions, no preferences communicated, no itinerary suggestions. The key on the kitchen table and the flat exactly as it was, available to be made into whatever I needed it to be. I had spent the first day doing what I always did in new spaces, walking every room, opening every window, standing in each one at different times of day to understand the light. The flat had the particular character of a space that had been lived in by many people over many years without being significantly personalized. Good bones, neutral surfaces, the quality of a place that was waiting to become something. I liked it immediately. It suited the work. I called him that first evening from the kitchen, where I'd been eating something I'd bought at the market down the road, sitting on the kitchen counter in the late London evening light, which was different from New York's light, in a way I was already trying to understand. "How is it?" he asked. "The flat is good," I said. "The city is—" I paused, looking for it. "The city is older than New York in a way that changes the light. Longer history, more layers. The light here has been hitting these buildings for centuries, and the buildings have been responding for centuries, and there is something in the accumulated response that I don't know how to describe yet, but I'm going to spend the next 4 months learning." I could hear the quality of his listening, the specific focused stillness of someone paying complete attention. "Tell me more," he said. So I did. I told him about the walk from the flat to the museum that morning, the specific quality of the June morning in the streets around Notting Hill, the way the light came through the gaps between buildings at an angle that was different from the New York perpendicular, the way the old stone absorbed and released light differently from glass and steel. I talked for 20 minutes, following the thread of observation wherever it led, and he listened without interrupting except to ask questions that were the right questions. Not polite questions, engagement questions, questions that pushed the thread further. "You're going to make something extraordinary there," he said, when I finally stopped. "You said that already." "It bears repetition." "When are you coming?" I asked. 3 weeks. The Cresswell settlement final hearing is the 15th. I can come after. "Come after," I said. "I'll have the material problem figured out by then. I'll need someone to look at it with me." "I'll look at it with you," he said. "Good," I said. "Also, I found a restaurant near the museum that has, I don't know how to describe what they do with fish. You need to experience it." Something that was entirely warm moved through his voice. "I'll be there in 3 weeks." "Good night, Adrian." "Good night." I sat on the kitchen counter in the London evening and looked out at the rooftops of Notting Hill, a different city's skyline than the one I'd looked at for 6 months from 53 floors up, and I thought, I am here. I am making something. He is there. He is making something. In 3 weeks we will be in the same city looking at the same problem together. I thought, this is what after looks like. Not the end of a story. The beginning of the part that doesn't have a name yet, because the part that doesn't have a name yet is the part that is actually being lived. I liked it. I liked it the way I liked old glass and salvaged wood, and the specific quality of light that has been somewhere for a long time. Liked it for what it was, not what it resembled. I got down from the counter and washed my plate and went to bed and slept well in the flat that smelled of old brick and the London summer. And in the morning, I went to the museum and started working. The material problem at the museum was different from anything I'd encountered before. The new wing was designed by a young architect who had, intentionally, created an atrium that resisted the easy solution. The ceiling was not flat or simple, but a complex geometry of intersecting planes that caught light from 3 directions and did something with it that was beautiful, and from an installation standpoint, structurally complicated. Where the Kane Tower atrium had offered a clear vertical axis that the installation could inhabit, this space offered multiple competing axes, none of them dominant, each making a different argument about where the eye should go. I spent the first week simply looking, walking the space at different hours, photographing the light at 20-minute intervals throughout the day, making notes in the physical sketchbook, and in the mental one that ran continuously beneath the conscious work. I spoke to the architect, a woman named Priya who was 29, and had the specific intensity of someone who had made something ambitious and was genuinely curious about what it was going to become, at length about her intentions and her concerns. I walked the building's history in the archive, understanding the layers of renovation and addition that had accumulated in the institution's 200 years. On the 5th day, I understood the approach. Not the specific form, that would take weeks more, but the principle. The competing axes were not a problem to resolve, but a condition to embrace. The installation should not choose one axis and make it dominant. It should hold all of them in a conversation, the way a room of people speaking different languages holds all the languages simultaneously, the multiplicity itself becoming the meaning. I called Adrian from the museum atrium at 6 in the evening, the space empty, the evening light doing the thing it did at this hour. "I have it," I said. "Tell me." I told him. He listened with the complete attention and then asked 3 questions that were precisely the right 3 questions. The questions that tested the concept against the structural reality, against the material possibilities, against the experience of a person walking through the space. Not challenges. The questions of someone who wants the thing to be as good as it can be and knows that pressure tests the good work and breaks the bad. "It will work," he said, when I'd answered all 3. "Yes," I said, "it will work. It will be extraordinary." "You have to stop saying that." "I will stop saying it," he said, "when it stops being true, which I don't anticipate." I stood in the London Museum atrium in the evening light and laughed. The full laugh, the one that came from somewhere below the managed surface, the one I'd had more of in the past 7 months than in the previous 4 years. "I miss you," I said. A pause. "I miss you too," he said. The simple version, the direct version. No infrastructure, no arrangement, just the true thing said plainly. 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. Chapter 6. When he arrives. Violet, 3 weeks later, London. He landed on a Thursday morning and came directly from the airport. I knew he was coming. We had coordinated the time, the logistics, the way two people who respect each other's schedules coordinate things. But knowing the time and hearing the knock on the flat's door were different things, and I stood for a moment on the other side of the door with my hand on the latch and thought about the distance between knowing and the thing itself. I opened the door. He was in his travel coat, which was different from his New York coat, lighter, less formal, the coat of someone who had packed for a specific purpose and chose appropriate clothing for that purpose rather than defaulting to the professional register. He had the particular quality of someone who had been traveling and was fully present anyway, the tiredness visible only in a slight loosening of the usual containment, the guard slightly lower than the working day's version. He looked at me with the full attention look, the inventory check, brief and complete, then something that was simpler than any of his usual expressions, something that was just, there you are. Come in, I said. He came in. He looked at the flat, at the transformation 3 weeks had wrought, the studio materials stacked along the east wall, the sketchbooks open on every available surface, the string of photographs I'd pinned above the kitchen table mapping the museum's light at hourly intervals, the fragment of red hook glass I'd brought from New York now positioned on the windowsill where the morning light hit it. He looked at the glass. You brought it, he said. It brings good light, I said. He turned from the window and looked at me. He looked at me for a long moment, with the full, unhurried, total attention that I had stopped managing and started simply receiving. Then he crossed the room. There is a quality to reunions after separation that is specific to people who have been honest with each other. Not the performance of reunion, not the heightened theatrics of a return, but the specific quality of two people picking up exactly where they left off, which is possible only when the leaving and the returning are both understood to be parts of the same ongoing thing rather than separate events. He held me for a long time, which was also new. In the early months, he'd been careful about physical contact that had no utilitarian framing, the romantic gesture, or the crisis response. Just holding required the simple admission of need, which had been harder for him than anything else. He was learning that too. I felt him relax incrementally, the travel tension releasing, the professional calibration settling into something quieter. 3 weeks, I said into his shoulder. 3 weeks, he agreed. It was enough time to miss you properly, but not enough time to go abstract, I said. You're still very specific in my mind. He laughed, the real laugh, which was still something I kept every instance of. What does going abstract mean? It's what happens when you've been away from someone long enough that they stop being a specific person and become a symbol of what they represent. You were still very specifically you. Is that good? It's the best possible thing, I said. I took him to the museum that afternoon. Not to show it to him in the way of a presentation, to work. I had 3 material questions that needed a second set of eyes, and I had been saving them for his arrival because his eyes were the right ones. We spent 2 hours in the atrium with the sketchbooks and the photographs and the physical samples I'd been working with, and he asked the right questions, and I answered them. And we argued briefly about the suspension rigging in a way that was entirely professional and entirely intimate simultaneously. The argument of 2 people who understand the same problem from different angles and are trying to find the view that holds both. He was right about the rigging. I told him so. Thank you, he said, with the serious expression of someone receiving a concession they know has weight. Don't make it strange, I said. I'm just nodding that it doesn't always happen. It happens when you're right, I said, which is more often than you know what to do with, so let's not encourage it. The real smile. We walked back through the museum's older galleries on the way out, the permanent collection, the rooms that had been there for 200 years, the accumulation of everything the institution had decided mattered enough to keep. He moved through the galleries the way he moved through all spaces that held important things, with the specific, unhurried quality of someone who is genuinely looking, not performing the act of looking. He stopped in front of a painting. Small, 18th century, a landscape I didn't recognize the name of Low Hills, a sky doing something specific with cloud and light, the quality of a specific afternoon at a specific place in a specific century. My mother had a print of this, he said. In the house, I never knew it was a real painting. I stood beside him and looked at the painting. At the hills, the sky, the quality of light that a painter 250 years ago had looked at and decided to record because it was necessary. Because it was the kind of light that deserved to exist past the afternoon that produced it. She would have brought you here, I said, if she'd had the chance. Yes, he said, she would have. We stood in front of the painting for a while. The gallery was quiet around us, the other visitors passing in the respectful half-silence of museum spaces. I think about her differently now, he said. Since the crest, since the installation, before I thought about her mostly as the loss, the shape of the absence. Now I think about her more as, he paused, as the continuing thing, what she made that is still here, what I made from what she taught me, what you made from what she left. That's salvage, I said. The real version of it, not the material, the person. He looked at me, something quiet and enormous. Yes, he said, that's exactly what it is. We stayed in London for the weekend. He had meetings on Friday, but the weekend was clear. A deliberate clearing, I understood. A choice made before the trip to ensure that the time here would be time rather than work with time fitted around it. Saturday we went to markets, Portobello, where the salvage dealers were, the stalls of old glass and reclaimed hardware, and the specific kind of beautiful, useless things that exist at the intersection of history and object. I found 3 pieces of glass that I bought for the installation, and he found a small architectural fragment, carved stone, 19th century, from a demolished building in a Welsh town he'd never visited, and bought it without deliberating. What's that for? I asked. The library shelf, he said, next to the red hook glass. I looked at him. You're collecting now. I've always collected, he said. I'm collecting differently. What's the difference? Thought about it. Before I collected things because they were exceptional, because they represented the best of their kind and having them was a form of accuracy. The right objects in the right places. A pause. Now I'm collecting things because they're connected to something. This, he held up the stone fragment. I don't know this building. I don't know this town. But this came from somewhere that mattered to someone, and it has that quality in it, and I want it near the glass that you've been carrying for 4 years. You want to start a collection of things with histories, I said. I want to start a collection of things connected to what we are, he said, which is the same thing. We are. The 2 words, unremarkable in their simplicity, carrying everything. I looked at him on the Portobello Road with his stone fragment and his travel coat and the Saturday market noise around us, the dealers and the tourists and the beautiful junk and the serious finds, and I thought, 4 years. He spent 4 years looking for this. I spent 4 years not knowing I was findable. I thought, and here we are, on a Saturday morning in June, on a street full of other people's histories, adding to our own. Come on, I said. I want to show you something 2 stalls down. He followed me through the market, and I showed him a piece of Victorian copper that I thought might work in the London installation, and he asked the right questions about it, and I bought it, and we continued down the market with our things under our arms and the June morning around us and the city being the city. Simple, ordinary. The best kind of thing. Chapter 7. What he does on Sunday morning. Violet, Sunday. I woke to the sound of the kitchen. Not loud, the specific soft sounds of someone moving carefully in a space they don't want to wake anyone with. The deliberate quiet of a cabinet opening, the controlled sound of water running, the considered placement of objects on a surface. The sounds of someone who has decided that the other person's sleep matters more than their own convenience. I lay in the bed in the London flat and listened to the sounds from the kitchen and thought about all the versions of him I had by now accumulated. The controlled professional version of the early weeks, the one who spoke quietly in dangerous situations and arranged elevator malfunctions and paid very close attention. The version in the library at 3 a.m., telling the truth. The version at the crest in the doorway, letting the open thing show. The version asleep in the chair with the blanket. The version at Alina's hospital. The version buying a stone fragment at Portobello because he wanted things with histories near the thing I'd carried. This version. The version that made coffee in a London flat on a Sunday morning with deliberate quiet because I was sleeping. I got up. He was in the kitchen in the clothes he'd slept in, barefoot, making something that involved the good coffee I'd sourced from a shop on the high street, and the particular focused attention he brought to any physical task, which always produced results that were better than the task required. He heard me and looked up. "You didn't have to get up," he said. "I wanted to," I said. I sat on the kitchen counter, my preferred position in kitchens, the elevation of it, the ability to see the whole room, and watched him finish making the coffee with the same attention I'd been bringing to everything about him for 7 months, which had not diminished, which had, if anything, deepened. In the way that close attention deepens the longer you pay it. You stop seeing the surface and start seeing the structure, the specific architecture of a person, the load-bearing points and the ornamental ones, and the places where the two overlap. He poured and handed me a cup. He leaned against the counter across from me and held his own cup and looked at me with the direct, unhurried look. "What are you thinking?" he asked. The question he'd learned to ask. The question that a year ago he would have answered for himself, in advance, with the research and the surveillance, would have known the answer to before the conversation, because not knowing things about people who mattered to him was not something the old version could tolerate. The new version asked. "I'm thinking about you," I said. "About how I know you now, all the versions, and how the versions add up to something that is more than the sum of them." "That's generously framed," he said. "The versions include some difficult ones." "The difficult ones are part of the sum," I said. "I'm not being generous, I'm being accurate." He was quiet for a moment. "What does the sum add up to?" I thought about it the way I thought about real questions, not performing the answer, finding it. "Someone who has been trying," I said, "for a very long time, not always correctly, not always in the right direction, but trying with everything you have to be equal to the things you love." I held his gaze. "That's not a small thing. Most people stop trying long before you do." He was very still in the way that meant the thing had landed in the real place, rather than the managed one. "I'm going to keep trying," he said. "I know," I said. "I'll be watching." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." The Sunday morning was very quiet. The London street below was doing its Sunday things, slower than weekdays, the particular tempo of a day that has opted out of urgency. The red hook glass on the windowsill was catching the morning light and doing what it did, and the stone fragment from Portobello was on the table, and the sketchbooks were open everywhere, and the installation materials were along the east wall, and we were in a kitchen on the 5th floor of a Victorian conversion in Notting Hill on a Sunday morning in June. "What do you want to do today?" I asked. "Whatever you want to do," he said. "I have no requirements." I looked at him. "You have no requirements. You, Adrian Kane, have no requirements for a Sunday." "I have one." "What?" "You," he said. "Present, that's the only requirement." It was so simple. It was so simply true. "Then you're covered," I said. "I'm present." "Then I have everything I need," he said. We drank our coffee. The morning did its morning things. At some point I got down from the counter and we went out into the London Sunday, the markets, the parks, the specific quality of a June morning in a city that has been doing June mornings for 1,000 years and has gotten very good at them. We walked a long way. We talked about the installation, and about the crest restoration, and about Alina's painting, and about a building he was considering in Tokyo, and about a piece I'd seen in a gallery in Marylebone on Thursday that had done something new with reflected light. We stopped at a garden in Kensington that had a specific quality of afternoon light that I spent 20 minutes photographing while he sat on a bench and read something on his phone with the relaxed patience of someone who has no objection to waiting. No management, no schedule, no arrangement, just two people in a city that was not their city on a Sunday present. "Thank you for coming," I said when we were walking back. "Thank you for being here to come to," he said. I thought 4 years of looking, and here. I thought necessary. I thought, yes. End of part 8. Cliffhanger. He left London on Monday morning. She stood at the flat's window and watched the car go, which she had not expected to do. Then she turned back to the studio wall, where the material plan for the London installation was taking shape in the overlapping language of notes and photographs and sample swatches. Her phone rang at noon. Not Adrian. Nora. Nora never called. Nora emailed, texted, sent calendar invites. Nora's communication. Architecture was entirely written, a preference Violet had come to understand as the habit of someone who understood that the written record was safer than the spoken one. Nora was calling. Violet answered. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that precedes the kind of news that requires a pause. "Violet," Nora said. "Richard Cresswell died this morning. Natural causes. His estate is contesting the Crest transfer. And there is something else. His will names Adrian as a beneficiary. A significant one.